right, so for those of you who weren't here last time, a little refresh. We have learned that this world is full of dragon riders. There is a war going on that we haven't seen much about, but it seems to be involving human armies, people riding dragons, fighting against bugs, we think? You think? But we haven't seen much about it. We are following the life of a little cook boy. He's a pot scrubber, and he is currently just picked up some food for the dragons. Crawls into the bed, bedtime story, bedtime story. All right. Chapter 3, Heat in the Kitchens. The heat of the order hall kitchens was intense. The chopping, sizzling, slicing, and shouting from the staff was overwhelming. A meaty smell filled the air with food cooked for 15 dragons and their riders. Holt stood armed with a scrubbing brush and a great basin of water. It was so deep that it would have covered his head as a child. Huffing and puffing, he lunged for his next target, a heavy pewter pot. He brought the brush to bear against the crust of grease, pushing against the grime as though he were a spearman cutting out the scourge. Once cleaned, Holt heaved the pot out and dried it, only to have a kitchen hand near enough to pounce on it, take it back to his stove, and begin throwing in hunks of beef with sunburnt peppers and yellow spices. Holt sighed and wiped his brow. A dull ache plagued his back. For each dish he washed, it seemed 2 more were added. Yet working at a frantic pace, he managed to get through the seemingly endless pile. Another kitchen hand brought over a pan still spitting goose fat and placed it atop the stack without so much as a glance at Holt. The ache in his back flared into a throb. Groaning, Holt twisted sharply to pop his spine. Relief washed through him, and, with a resigned sigh, he picked up the fat-laden pan. He clung to the knowledge that soon he'd be 16 and the formal apprentice to his father. No more pot washing then. Just as he was about to douse the pan in soapy water, his father approached. "Holt, what are you up to, lad?" His father looked harassed, his black hair all wild and messy, just like Holt's. He wore a stained apron over a plump belly. Hey, bro, saved. Hey, we both got the plump belly going on. You know what they call this, chat? They call this way too much cookies. Apron over his plump belly, but his eyes were bright and full of life. A feast always excited Jonah Cook. Yet whereas Holt loved the gathering of dragons and magic, his father loved the food more. Washing up? Good, jolly good, said his father, as though Holt washing pots was some novelty. His father could be terribly distracted at times like this. "Listen, I need to start on that elk for Silver Strike, but I think I left the recipe book down in the larder. Can you get it for me?" Pleased for this chance to break the cycle of cleaning, Holt hurriedly complied. He dabbed his wrinkly hands dry on a cloth before heading for the cellar door by the far wall. A flight of wooden steps led down into the cool dimness beneath the kitchens. Down here, there was only eerie lantern light. Candles flickered in the gloom as though floating in mid-air. The sheer rock walls of the crag were cold to the touch, and, thanks to the feast, the many bare shelves only added to the cavernous feeling of the place. It didn't take long for Holt to find the recipe book. He had a hunch it would be by the spices and was proven right. There it lay upon the 3-legged stool underneath hanging lines of onions, garlic, and ginger root. Man, some fresh garlic and ginger always hits the spot. Man, tossing that into a pan? Sheesh. Holt picked it up delicately. It was the most expensive item his father possessed, containing recipes to please dragons with all their peculiar tastes. Not all cooks in the land held such a treasure tome of knowledge. It was likely why Holt's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had worked in the crag kitchens. One day, Holt would be given the book, and would work here too. At least I won't be any regular old cook, Holt thought proudly as he scampered up the larder stairs to the kitchens. He found his father inspecting the elk and counting out the other ingredients. He wiped his brow, looking relieved to see Holt. "I'll take that," Jonah said. He opened up the book at the page marked by the silk tassel and ran a finger down the page as his eyes flickered from the paper to the ingredients on the table. Holt knew the recipe well enough, having pored over it. The cups of water and wine, the bacon, the mushrooms, cinnamon, ginger, and a small dish of precious saffron seemed to be in order. "If that's all, Father, I'll return to the dishes and make sure I get through them all before Silver Strike arrives." His father grunted. "Remember I asked—" "What?" Jonah said, distracted. "Oh, yes, we'll see, son, we'll see. Before Holt could press the issue, his father snapped the book shut and placed it on the work table. Right, well, let's get started on this one. You'll need hours to simmer. Holt was taken aback. You want me to help you? I want you to learn. Start by dicing the steak. And Holt did so, happily. Working on Silver Strike's meal was an honor. He carefully diced the meat, ensuring every cut was of equal size to cook evenly. Next, he thinly sliced the rashers of bacon, as well as the mushrooms, in time for his father to return and inspect his work. Good job, his father said approvingly. Your knife skills have come a long way. Now, bring it all here and I'll get started. Holt searched for butter to line the pot and pass it to his father, then returned for the chopping board heaped with meat. By the time he brought the board to his father's side, the butter was already browning, releasing a nutty smell. He was about to tip the meat into the pot when a sudden silence caused him to pause. Rarely would the busy kitchens turn still in an instant. Yet for a rider to visit in person instead of their squire was an event rare enough to make everyone stop and put their work and stare. Holt was no exception. For a moment, he forgot about the butter and the meat and focused on the man who had just entered. It was Brode, one of the most experienced riders of the crag. Brode the Bold, as he had once been known, although nowadays most called him Brode the Brooding. Holt sympathized with the sentiment. Brode had a dark, sunken face, as though prematurely under the shadow, permanently. He was old, very old. No one of Holt's station knew his age for sure, yet he appeared to be middle-aged with short gray hair and coarse stubble. Despite his age, he moved with a purpose and strength that spoke of a younger man, which, Holt guessed, was due in peace to his dragon's magic still within him. And that was how Brode differed from the others. He no longer had his dragon. Perhaps that was why he wore simple clothes, warm boots, trousers, a cream shirt, and frayed black jerkin, instead of the full regalia of the order. Despite his modest appearance, he had the sort of intense, intelligent eyes that could command a room, eyes that now fell upon Holt's father. Jonah, a word, if you will. Right away, honored rider, Jonah said. First, he rounded on Holt and thrust the wooden spoon into his empty hands. Watch over this. Want a nice sea on all sides. Back to work, everyone. Come along now. And then he was off, helplessly attempting to smooth down his apron as he approached Brode. Holt dumped the meat into the pot and stirred, watching Brode out of the corner of his eye. It was most unusual for a rider to descend to the depths of the kitchen. Even for Brode, it was quite unexpected. Smelling the bacon crisping, Holt gave the contents of the pot another good shake, then sidled back to the workstop to gather the chopped mushrooms. He risked another glance toward Brode and his father, whose eyes widened. Here? Now? Jonah exclaimed. Returning to the pot, Holt threw in the mushrooms, but forgot to stir, starting to overhear the conversation. Collect yourself, Mr. Cook. I'm certain you can do it. You just need to work quicker. Jonah blustered something incoherent. Holt felt a pang run through him. This could only mean that their guests of honor had arrived early, but that would mean the kitchens would need to work harder. He, Holt, would not get to see Silver Strike. And though the elk in the pot abandoned him, Holt turned, staring at his father and Brode in open-mouthed horror. Brode clasped a hand on his father's shoulder, then turned and began ascending the staircase to the upper levels, to the glory of the order, to the wonder. Jonah Cook shook his head and rubbed his eyes before bringing his hands together in decisive clap. A kitchen hand banged a ladle to help quieten the staff. Everyone, Silas Silverstrike has arrived. Commander Denno wishes the feast to begin earlier. I'm afraid we won't have time for any breaks if we're to oblige her. A collective groan rose, but the staff returned to their tables, albeit a bit more agitated speed. Jonah was soon surrounded by scullery maids and kitchen hands, gesticulating and babbling at him. Holt didn't react at first. He stood dumbstruck. Few riders of such renown ever visited this outpost at the edge of the world, and now he was to be kept slaving in the hot kitchens, confined to the endless washing up. Holt! Stir that, for goodness sake! His father's fearful cry jolted Holt from his reverie. He smelled the problem before he saw it. The meat was starting to burn. Holt tried to salvage it, but the bacon and venison stuck to the pot. Not good. Panicked, he grabbed for a cup of water set out for the dish and poured it in. The pot hissed, spat, and billowed steam. The meat and mushroom moved a little easier now, and Holt finished by adding 2 cups of wine. By this point, his father was back on the scene, his face reddened with worry. He seized the spoon from Holt's began to stir the mixture as though for all the world it would undo whatever damage had been done. Then, he lifted the pan off the hot charcoals and placed it on the cooler side of the stove. All the dishes, lad, Jonah sighed. Where's your head at? Without meaning to, Holt's gaze drifted toward the stairs. His father sighed. I know you'll be, disappointed. Holt melancholically turned to the chopping board and reached out for the bag of mushrooms, then preparing the ingredients again. I'm sorry. I'll make everything ready for you, then return to the basin. Holt, his father said more softly. I won't get in your way again. He had just picked up the knife and began slicing when his father's hand fell on his. Accidents happen. I shouldn't have. No, but you're tired. We're all tired. The grim bags under Jonah's eyes attested to this. What a good dad. What a nice dad. Holt wiped his hands upon a nearby cloth, then rubbed at his own eyes. From work and worry, they barely slept for days making everything ready, and now it was all to be rushed. It just doesn't seem fair, Holt said. No, it isn't. But who are we to make demands of the riders? They want dinner a few hours earlier, then that's that. Holt turned his attention to the black pot. Perhaps, at least, he could try to make his mark on the occasion. With your leave, I can prepare the chickens for Silver Strike's dragon. Jonah shook his head. Why not? You ruined this meal, for a start. I know. I'm sorry. I got distracted. But I can stuff and roast 5 chickens. Jonah pinched the bridge of his nose. We've been over this, Holt. Our instructions are to roast the birds simply with plenty of butter and thyme, nothing more. But our book says that storm dragons prefer it best when... His father gave a harder sigh. You're only 15, but I'll be your official apprentice soon. Even if you were already, I couldn't let you serve unrequested food. Never mind to the dragon of Klesh's caliber. But what do you think will happen, exactly? That Silver Strike's dragon will be so impressed that you be summoned to the Great Hall by the flight commander will initiate you on the spot? Holt lowered his head. Lowborn had become riders before. He knew all of the stories of Cedric the Common, who died of his wounds after killing a Scourge Queen and ending the incursion in Brennan, of Hild the Humble, a beautiful washerwoman who had married a rider against everyone's wishes and bonded with her husband's dragon after he fell in battle. It wasn't impossible. It's been done before. What's our name? His father's tone was serious now. Cook. And what will it always be? Cook. It's the way things are, Holt. Trying to fight it is like a mouse facing down a dragon. Still staring at his toes, Holt fought to control the flux of rising emotions. He felt powerless, frustrated, afraid, and anxiety boiled up that his father was right, that his life was already charted, and that this was all he would be. Holt lost the battle for control. None of it was his father's fault, but his father was the one standing before him. Holt raised his head, looked his father directly in the eye, and said, I'd rather face that dragon than live as a mouse forever. And with that, he ripped off his apron and threw it down and stormed off. A legendary rider was about to arrive, and he wasn't going to miss it. After all, he would have endless time to be stuck down in the kitchens. Drama! Oh my gosh. Chapter 4. Silas Silverstrike. The front courtyard of the crag was a crescent moon in shape and large enough to fit a small army. Gnarled, twisted posts stood at intervals of the perimeter, each one holding a dancing ball of magical power. Holt heard they changed in color depending on the mood of the dragonflight. Right now, they pulsed a cheerful yellow. By the time Holt arrived, the riders and their squires were already martialized to greet their guests. Armor and scales alike glinted under the sun. Each rider also had a great weapon strapped on their backs. Most were swords, too big for the ordinary humans to wield, and each blade's shape and color was influenced by the rider's magic. Fire riders' swords appeared to ripple like flames. Ice riders' of blades came with sharper points. Emerald riders had thick, broad blades, sturdy as stone, and the storm riders had jagged blades which spoke of lightning. And the mystics, well, there was no end to the variety there. Dragons stood on their 4 legs by their riders, taking up the space that several horse-drawn wagons would, making it hard to see beyond them. Not that Holt would have been granted a privileged view at any rate. He skirted the crowd, behind rows of regular troops, stable hands, and other servants of higher rank than himself. But Holt was younger and nimbler than most, and he knew a good spot. He'd taken it up years before, when Princess Talia had arrived and a similar grand welcome had been known. Carved statues of ancient riders flanked the main gates of the Order Hall. Their dragons were carved in stone, too, although these were much smaller than their real-life counterparts. Holt scrambled up the horn back of one now, finding a perch in the crook of its wing. It wasn't comfortable, and he was far from the front, but it had an unhindered view. Despite the times, people still risked lining the streets far below as Silverstrike passed by. It was good of him to let them see him. They would feel safer for it. Holt couldn't make Silverstrike out at the distance, although his dragon was clearly visible, large and granite gray like a fierce storm cloud. With any luck, Silas would demonstrate his fabled powers for them. In the courtyard, none of the riders showed outward signs of excitement. There was a disciplined confidence to them, which, while reassuring, always gave them a sense of being different, of being more than merely human. Among the closest to the front was the rider Merc and his dragon Biter, but Holt's attention was drawn to the figure at the head of the order. Flight Commander Denna was an exceptionally tall woman, Mommy, in gleaming silver plate armor, which was said to be heavier than any other rider could handle. Mommy. Her weapon was different too, being a huge white warhammer with green runes. He'd heard her mystic dragon granted her increased strength, Mommy. On top of that, she was the rank of champion and might advance to the rank of lord soon. If rumors around the crag were to be believed, surprisingly, Denna's dragon, the matriarch of the crag, was nowhere to be seen. That was strange, but Holt put it out of his mind. Besides, Denna was a much younger girl who could not have been more physically different from Denna if she tried. Princess Talia had a slender figure and sleek hair that fell past her shoulders. That hair was an extraordinary color, like gold reflecting firelight. Even as Holt watched her, Talia cast a sideways glance at the flight commander and straightened her back. Talia's dragon, who was called Pyrrha, was also present. Holt had prepared enough spiced beef for the princess dragon to know her type was fire, even if her purple scales were an unusual coloring. Pyra was still young, just 5 years old, and while large enough to ride, she was smaller than the older dragons of the crag. She stood beside Talia with a proud, stiff neck, fixated upon their approaching guest. As Silas drew closer, the dragons of the crag roared in greeting. Some swooped down overhead while others bowed their long necks out of respect, and with each step, Holt felt his heart beat faster. He was here. Really here. Every story Holt had heard growing up about Silas had to be true, because he was real. Silas Silverstrike took his last step and emerged into the courtyard. From this distance, it was hard to make out his finer features, although his chalk-white hair was thick and wild, and lifted as though permanently blown back by the wind. His skin had darkened from decades of flying above the clouds, and he held himself unlike anyone Holt had seen, including Commander Denna. Best of all, Holt swore he could see crackles of blue static crawling around Silas's hands, as though the magic he wielded might burst forth at any moment. The orbs of light around the courtyard changed in his presence, and became miniature thunderstorms trapped within the gnarled posts. Light Commander Dennis stepped forward to meet him. He raised a clenched fist, and all the dragons fell silent. Denna greeted Silas with a firm clasp of his shoulder, which he returned, and they spoke a few private words. Holt strained his neck in a futile attempt to hear them. He was so far back that even when Commander Denna addressed the crowd, he could barely hear what she was saying. So, it came as a great surprise and delight when Silverstrike drew his sword, a gray, jagged blade with lines of sparkling blue powder. Powder? Power. And held it skyward. Sparkling blue powder, Walter. We gotta cook, Walter. You gotta make more of your sparkling blue powder, Walter. At once a dark cloud formed in an otherwise cloudless sky. Then came a flash of forked lightning that struck Silas's sword. A boom followed, echoing around every nook and cranny of the rocky crag. And such was his power, Silas Silverstrike stood unharmed. If anything, he looked radiant, younger than his many years, and in his free hand a blue-silver power gathered. When the lightning bolt ceased, Silas unleashed his new power high overhead, and these strands formed the detailed outline of a dragon in flight, its eyes alive from crackling silver energy. The riders cheered. Dragons bellowed their approval. Servants stood in awe, their mouths agape and clapping at this masterful display of magic. Holt clapped too, so hard he almost fell from his vantage point. That was when he noticed who was standing below him. "Ruddy show-off," Brode said. He looked up, perhaps sensing someone was about to fall on top of him. "I think that might be the first smile I've seen on your face in months, boy." His voice was gruff but flat, neutral, as if he came from nowhere. Holt had been told that accent belonged to those who grew up near the free city of Athra, where tongues from all the world came together and melded into one. Embarrassed, Holt found his balance and sat back up. "Sorry, honored rider." "What are you sorry for? For smiling?" Holt said nothing. His outburst had caused enough trouble for one day. Brode smirked. "You're alive, aren't you? Smiling more often than might do you some good." "Come on, just smile more." Holt stared pointedly ahead, but Brode carried on. "You can spar back, you know. You should tell me that smiling more's rich coming from a crinkled old grump like me." Holt looked down this time. He gulped. "Is that an order, honored rider?" "Ha! That's a little better. You can drop the honored when speaking with me." He truly wasn't like the others, not least because he wasn't wearing his sword. Conversing with a rider beyond receiving orders wasn't common. In fact, it was so uncommon, Holt found himself wary. Was this some kind of trick or trap? "Ha! That's a little better. You can drop the honored when speaking with me." Oh, I read this one. "Then what shall I call you?" "Call me my name." "Brode the Brooding?" The old man snickered again. "You've got some spirit in you, deep down." He seemed to bite the words. "That might be unfair of me. My brothers and sisters are hardly an encouraging lot." Holt thought on Lord Merc's demands in the scornful tone that morning. Then again, the soldiers had arguably behaved even worse. In his time, Holt had found that if a person at top kicked down, then the folk continued kicking down until all those at the bottom were flattened. "We each have our role." "Do we?" Brode said, though his tone did not invite an answer. Holt ignored him and turned his attention back to the welcoming of Silverstrike, who was still engrossed in conversation with Commander Denna. A sudden restlessness came over Holt then. The very air seemed to grow taut with tense energy. It was such an unsettling feeling, he let out a gasp, which was thankful to hear many of the servants reacting in the same way. "It's Klesh." "Silverstrike's dragon is doing this?" "Not on purpose, I would hope. With a core as powerful as Klesh, some of that energy is bound to emanate." Clock looking at you at. Holt didn't fully grasp Brode's meaning. The riders often talked of cores, abilities, and motes, but it made little sense to him. Whatever the case, Klesh's power was impressive. Holt had of course felt the effects of a dragon's magic before. Biter had chilled the air around him that very morning, but this was on another level. "You'll adjust in a bit," Brode assured him. He flashed a wry smile. "But until then." He reached up and touched Holt's leg. A jolt surged from Brode's fingertips, so powerful it was a visible flash. "Ouch!" He rubbed the spot, though there was no harm done. "Must be as powerful as legends say." "The stories are right on that account, at least." "Not even Commander Denna and the Matriarch have this effect." "Silas is the rank of Lord, a Storm Lord. As strong as Denna is, she is still only the rank of Champion." "Perhaps one day, Commander Denna will grow that powerful as well." Brode gave him a curious look and shrugged. The riders at the front of the welcoming party split ranks then. In the new space provided, Silas stepped forth and produced a glass orb the size of an apple. What does Silas sound like? "The liberation of Athra," he declared. His accent sounded like the lit of music. "The liberation of Athra," he declared. His accent contained the lit and music of the people of the Fey Forest. All eyes turned towards Silas. The Stormlord threw the orb to the ground, breaking upon impact. A great deal of purple mist billowed out from it, far more than such a small object should be able to contain. The mist collected into ghostly figures, then solidified into what was unmistakably Silas and Klesh fighting against an enormous insect. The bug had too many eyes, pincers the length of pikes, and screeched so terribly Holt winced. He knew what this scene must be. Silas was famed for ending the greatest scourge incursion for the last century, and that final battle had taken place at the distant eastern city of Athra. Though some magic, Silas was showing them the moment. Silas and Klesh, of course, prevailed, with Silas plunging his sword down through the creature's head. Everyone applauded again, and Silas beamed, his arms spread as though to take hold of their adoration. Holt enthusiastically joined in. If you knew how much money he just smashed in the ground, you wouldn't be cheering, Brode said. Holt ignored him this time. If Brode wished to spread his bad mood, he could do it elsewhere. Brode carried on regardless. Ghost orbs cost more than your father makes in a year. What? You heard, Brode said, dropping his voice as the general applause died down. And he gets a discount, given they produce them at Falklear. Holt wondered why Brode was telling him this. Riders were noble. Nobles were rich. He'd seen the riders here carrying orbs like that around at times, but had no idea they were made at Falklear Fortress, where the Order based its headquarters. Holt cherished that nugget of information, as he did any about the riders. The welcoming ceremony proceeded. Riders representing each school of magic came forth one by one to present Silas with gifts, and Brode kept on speaking to him. Knowing that, do you still admire them? Of course. You want to be one of them, don't you? It's not a crime to voice a desire. Holt bit his lip and tightened his grip on the stone wing of the dragon. No, it wasn't a crime to say such a thing aloud, but it was futile. At last, he found his voice. Who wouldn't want to be a rider? Wise people. But no one can talk down to them. Everyone respects them. They have dragons who can fly. You can go wherever if you're a rider. Do anything. It's a very rosy picture you're painting. But it's true. You're free. Brode raised an eyebrow. And you're not. Of course I'm not. I'll never be. A swirl of red caught Holt's eye. His gaze moved from Brode and fell upon Princess Talia, who was shaking Silas Silverstrike's hand and conversing with him. She just swished her hair back off her face and had caught the wind, flowing in a long trail behind her. Holt quite forgot what he'd been saying. Brode coughed loudly. Do you think she's free? Holt shook his head and faced the old man. She's a princess and a rider. She's above everyone. Who can tell her what to do? Brode mused for a moment. Only her conscience can tell her what to do in the end, and her burden is great. Don't be so quick to envy. Holt's mood darkened. He only wanted to glimpse Silas Silverstrike in person. Perhaps see some magic and forget his dreary life for a while. Brode was goading him. If you have nothing kind to say to me, then please leave me alone. Now, don't get upset. I actually came here to look for you. For me? Holt said, surprised. For you. I have a task that needs doing, and all the other kitchen staff are too busy. Apparently they're one man down. You wouldn't know why, would you? Holt's cheeks flushed. Brode chuckled to himself and carried on. The matriarch is conducting a choosing of the Order's eggs today. Bad timing, but these things don't wait, even for stormlords from Falklear Fortress. Still, the matriarch would be remiss not to greet her guests, and so she is forced to push through more than she'd normally do in one session, and she'll need food brought to her. And does she know what she would like today? She's a mystic dragon, so she doesn't know. We're used to it. Bring a good selection and meet me down in the hatchery, Brode said, and bring a smile with you. Chapter 5, chat! And this is my cue to end stream and go see my wife. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this reading at the end of stream. I love you all. Thank you so much. I'll be live tomorrow at 12 p.m. EST, and I'll see you then. Oh, sorry, let me hit you with the Final Fantasy